The story begins on a quiet evening, in a small hospital room where the air felt still, as though the world itself had paused to honor a sacred moment. David sat by the bedside of his wife Amira. His hands were rough from years of work, yet they rested so gently on hers, as though afraid to disturb her fragile strength. Amira lay back against the pillows, her breaths slow, her face glowing with exhaustion and hope. In her arms, wrapped carefully in a white blanket, was the reason for all their waiting, their first child, their little girl. For months, David had imagined this moment. He had dreamed of tiny hands curling round his finger, of a soft cry, filling the silence of their home, of a life finally complete. The room smelled faintly of fresh linen and antiseptic, yet to him, it felt like the sweetest fragrance in the world. He leaned closer, his eyes shining, ready to see the child who would carry both their faces, their love, their story. Amira looked at him with tired eyes, but her smile was steady. "She's here, David," she whispered softly. "Our daughter." Her voice trembled, filled with both relief and wonder. David's heart swelled as he leaned forward. This was the moment he would never forget, the first glimpse of the life they had created together. Every dream, every prayer, every sacrifice had led to this night. And as he prepared to look at his daughter's face for the very first time, he could feel his own breath catching, his soul holding still. David leaned closer, his breath trembling as he pulled back the corner of the white blanket. And then, his heart skipped. For a moment, he thought his eyes had betrayed him. The tiny face that looked back at him was delicate, perfect, but so unexpected. Their daughter's skin was pale, so pale it seemed to glow under the dim hospital light. He blinked once, then twice, as though hoping the vision would change, but it did not. The child before him was undeniably theirs, yet she looked nothing like either of them. David's chest tightened. His hand, once reaching eagerly toward the baby, froze in the air. His smile faded slowly, replaced by a shadow of confusion. His mind whispered questions he could not voice. How? Why? What did this mean? His eyes flickered to Amira, and for a moment, he saw her watching him with tired but proud eyes, waiting for him to hold their child. She seemed unaware of the storm that had begun to build inside his heart. He forced himself to swallow, to breathe, to remain steady, yet behind his silence, 100 fears began to form. Could this be a mistake? Could something be wrong with the baby? Or his thoughts faltered, was it something far worse? His throat tightened at the possibility, and he turned quickly away, ashamed of even letting the thought enter his mind. This was his wife, the woman he trusted, the woman who had shared every joy and sorrow with him. And yet, as he looked once more at the pale face of his daughter, he felt a crack forming inside him. Amira's voice broke the silence. "David," she whispered gently, "do you want to hold her?" Her words carried warmth, but also a question, as though she could sense the sudden change in him. David nodded faintly, though his heart was heavy. He reached out again, unsure if his hands could carry both the child and the weight of what he had just discovered. David took the child into his arms, his movements careful, almost fragile. The tiny weight rested against his chest, lighter than he had imagined, yet heavy with questions he was not ready to ask. His daughter's skin was soft, almost translucent, her lips pink, her lashes fine and delicate. She was beautiful, perfect, but so different from what he had expected. He traced her small features with his eyes, her nose, her mouth, her tiny fingers curling instinctively against the fabric of his shirt. She was real, and she was his. Yet, deep inside, his heart trembled. Amira leaned back against the pillows, watching them both with tired joy. Her smile was faint but radiant, the kind that comes only after great struggle and great love. "She fits perfectly in your arms," she whispered softly, her voice barely more than a sigh. David forced a smile in return, not wanting to disturb her peace, not wanting to let his questions escape into the open air. The room felt hushed, the world outside muted, as if everything had slowed down to watch this fragile beginning. But inside David, the storm grew. He thought of his own parents, their warm brown skin, their strong features, passed down through generations. He thought of Amira's family, her gentle face, her graceful beauty, her roots as deep as his own. And then he looked again at Gracepale, fragile, untouched by either of their tones, and his heart cracked. Could love alone be enough to silence the doubts whispering at the edges of his mind? Asterisk, the baby shifted lightly in his arms, letting out a soft, broken sound, almost like a sigh. In that moment, his chest ached, and tears stung his eyes. Not of betrayal, not yet of acceptance, but of confusion. For he loved her, already loved her more than his own breath. He did not understand her, and what he could not understand, he feared might one day separate them. Asterisk, the night stretched on quietly. Yet inside David, time moved unevenly, racing with questions, sometimes slowing to the weight of silence. He sat by the bed, his arms wrapped around his daughter, but his mind was far from still. The world saw only a new father with his child, but deep in his chest, fear coiled tightly, whispering doubts he wished he could silence. Asterisk, he studied Grace, again, as though searching for some hidden cluesome line in her face that would tie her back to him. But every time his eyes lingered on her pale skin, he felt the ache return, sharper than before. He told himself it was foolish, that perhaps newborns always looked different in the beginning. Perhaps her color would change with time. And yet, the thought did not comfort him as he hoped it would. Instead, he felt a quiet distance for Minga's shadow he was ashamed of but could not escape. Asterisk, Amira's soft voice broke into his thoughts. She's perfect, isn't she? Her eyes glowed with quiet pride, her hand reaching weakly toward him. The trust in her gaze was unshakable, pure, and David's heart twisted. He nodded quickly, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. Yes, she's perfect, he whispered, his voice uneven. Amira sighed contentedly, closing her eyes, and rested back into the pillows, her exhaustion finally overtaking her. She had no reason to doubt, no reason to see the storm inside him. To her, their child was only love, only joy. Asterisk, David glanced down again at Grace, her small chest rising and falling in a rhythm too delicate for words. She was innocent. She had done nothing but exist, yet her existence had stirred questions that threatened to tear his soul apart. He closed his eyes, holding her tighter, as though by pressing her closer, he could press away his fear. But the fear lingered, whispering, waiting for a moment to grow louder. Asterisk, days passed, and soon the small family returned home. The house that had once felt ordinary now carried the gentle sound of a newborn's breath, the soft hum of lullabies, and the delicate rhythm of a life just beginning. Amira glowed with quiet happiness, her arms always cradling Grace, as though the world itself could not take her away. She spoke to the baby in hushed tones, kissed her tiny forehead, and rocked her gently through the nights. The home was filled with warmth. Asterisk, but for David, warmth alone was not enough to quiet the storm inside him. Each time he looked at his daughter, pride swelled in his chest, but so did doubt. He loved her, oh, how he loved her, but behind his love, the questions grew. Why was she so pale, so different? He told himself again and again that he trusted Amira. She had never given him a reason not to. She had always been his anchor, his comfort. And yet, late at night, when the house was quiet and the baby's soft cries echoed through the hall, his mind betrayed him. The whispers returned, cruel and unrelenting. Asterisk, he found himself standing in doorways, watching from a distance instead of stepping closer. His hands, once eager to hold Grace, now hesitated. He told Amira he was tired, that he needed rest after long days at work, though inside he longed to touch his daughter, to claim her as his own without fear. Still, something held him back, and Amira, lost in the glow of new motherhood, did not see the shadow forming in his eyes. Asterisk, one evening, as Amira rocked Grace on the couch, David lingered nearby. The lamplight spilled across them, painting the scene with peace. Amira looked up, her smile soft, her voice tender. "She has your nose, David," she said. He forced a laugh, but his gaze slipped away. Inside, the ache grew sharper. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to see himself in his child, but all he saw was difference, and it tore him quietly apart. Asterisk, the days slipped into nights, and the rhythm of family life began to form. Cries, feedings, soft lullabies each moment etched itself into the walls of their home. Amira embraced it with grace, her heart full, her soul tender. But David drifted in and out of the rhythm, like a man listening to music from another room. He was there, but not fully. His footsteps were heavier, his silences longer, and though he tried to hide it, Amira noticed one evening. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the soft suckling sounds of Grace at her bottle. Amira sat at the table, her hair falling gently around her tired face, her eyes resting lovingly on their daughter. David stood at the sink, staring at the stream of water as though it could wash away the thoughts that clung to him. His shoulders sagged under the weight of his silence. "David," Amira said softly, breaking the stillness. Her voice was calm, careful, as though she feared her words might disturb him. "You've been so quiet lately." She paused, her eyes searching his face. "Is something wrong?" He turned, slowly, his face caught between the need to reassure her and the urge to confess the doubts that haunted him. For a moment, their eyes met, and Amira's gaze was steady, filled with trust. He wanted to tell her everything, to spill the confusion, the fear, the whispers that gnawed at his peace. But the words clung to his throat, heavy and sharp. Instead, he forced a small smile and shook his head. "I'm just tired," he murmured. Amira studied him quietly, her heart uneasy. She wanted to believe him, yet she could feel the distance growing between them. She lowered her gaze back to Grace, pressing a soft kiss to her daughter's forehead. The silence returned, gentle but heavy, wrapping itself around the room like an unseen shadow. The house was quiet, wrapped in the deep stillness of midnight. Grace slept soundly in her crib, her tiny breaths rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The soft glow of the night lamp painted the room in warm gold, but inside, David, shadows pressed hard against his heart. He sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly, his body heavy with a weight he could no longer carry alone. Behind him, Amira stirred, her eyes opening slowly. She had grown used to his silences, to the way his thoughts seemed to drag him further from her with each passing day. But tonight, she could feel the heaviness more than ever. She pushed herself upright, resting against the pillows, and let her eyes linger on him. "David," she said gently, her voice steady but soft, "something is hurting you." He stiffened at her words, his throat tightening. For weeks he had buried his doubts, pushed them down beneath smiles and excuses, but they had grown restless, clawing at the walls of his silence until he could hardly breathe. He turned his head slightly, his eyes catching the crib. Grace lay there so peacefully, so innocent, and yet her very presence pulled at his heart with love and confusion all at once. "Amira," he began, his voice breaking before the words could form. He rubbed his hands across his face, trying to steady himself. "She's different," he whispered finally, the words almost trembling as they escaped him. Amira's brows furrowed slightly, though her voice remained calm. "Different. She's a baby, David. She's ours." David swallowed hard, his chest rising, with the ache of unshed tears. "Her skin, she doesn't look like us." The silence after his words was deep, stretching across the room like a wound. For the first time, his fears were spoken, raw and unhidden, hanging between them like fragile glass, ready to shatter. The silence after David's words was long and heavy. It hung in the air like a fragile thread, one that might snap with the wrong breath. David's chest rose and fell quickly, his eyes fixed on the crib, unable to look at his wife. He felt shame burning inside him for doubting, for speaking, for letting his fear touch what should have been joy. And yet, the words were out now. They could not be pulled back. Amira's eyes softened, her hand moving slowly to her chest as though to steady her heart. She had known he was troubled, had felt his distance, and seen the heaviness in his eyes. But hearing it aloud was different. It cut deep, not because she felt accused, but because she saw how much pain it caused him. For a moment, she let the silence rest, choosing her words with care. "David," she said softly, her voice low and calm, "I know what you're thinking. I've seen it in your eyes." Her gaze drifted toward the crib, her expression tender. "You're wondering why she looks different, why her skin is so light." She turned her eyes back to him, steady and sure. "And you're afraid of what that means." David swallowed hard, his throat tight, his eyes brimmed with tears he could no longer hide. "I don't want to doubt you, Amira. I love you. I love her. But I don't understand." His voice cracked, and he buried his face in his hands, torn between guilt and fear. Amira reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm. Her touch was gentle, grounding. "David," she whispered, "there is nothing to fear. She is ours, every part of her. You don't know this, but in my family, in my mother's side, children are sometimes born with skin much lighter than their parents. My grandmother was pale, almost like snow. It runs through the blood, a gift from generations past." Her words were calm, her truth clear, and as they filled the silence, a small light broke through the shadows in David's heart. For a long moment, David could not move. Amira's words lingered in the quiet air, seeping into the cracks of his heart, where doubt had taken root. He lifted his eyes slowly, meeting hers, and saw no anger there, no resentment, only love, steady and strong. The weight he had carried for weeks began to loosen, his chest rising with a trembling breath, as though the world itself had finally let him go. He turned toward the crib, where Grace slept without worry, her tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt holy. He rose from the bed and stepped closer, his legs unsteady, his hands shaking. Kneeling beside her, he reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the blanket. Tears welled and spilled freely down his face, falling without restraint. They were not the tears of suspicion anymore, nor the tears of fear, but tears of release, of love breaking through the walls of doubt. "I'm sorry," he whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking as he leaned closer. "My little girl, I'm so sorry." The words trembled from his lips as he rested a hand over his heart. "You are mine, you always were. Forgive me for even a moment of hesitation." His tears dropped softly onto the wood of the crib, glistening like tiny stars under the lamps. Glow dot behind him, Amira pressed her hand against her lips, her own tears flowing silently. She had prayed he would see, prayed that love would win over fear. Now, watching him kneel before their daughter, her heart ached with gratitude. This was the man she had chosen, the father her daughter would know. Not perfect, not unshaken, but real. And now fully hers again. David's shoulders shook as he whispered once more, this time with certainty. "You are my grace, my gift, my little girl." And in that moment, the storm that had haunted him finally broke, leaving only love in its place. Morning light spilled through the curtains, washing the small living room in soft gold. The shadows of the night before had lifted, leaving behind a quiet peace that settled deep in David's heart. He sat close beside Amira on the couch, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, his other hand resting gently on the tiny form of their daughter. Grace lay nestled against her mother's chest, her small face calm, her breaths steady, as though she carried the peace of heaven itself. David's eyes lingered on her, not with doubt anymore, but with awe. Each detail, the delicate curve of her lips, the tiny fingers curled into fists, the faint rise and fall of her chest felt like a miracle etched before him. He had almost let fear steal this joy, had almost allowed suspicion to rob him of the wonder of fatherhood. But now, every part of him clung to the truth. This was his child, his grace, his gift, and no difference of color or shape could change that. Amira leaned gently against him, her face tired but radiant, her eyes glistening with quiet joy. She could feel the difference in him, the way his body held closer, the way his touch lingered without hesitation. "She has your spirit," Amira whispered softly, tilting her head toward him. "Strong, gentle, she will know it when she grows." David smiled through the tears that threatened again, pressing a kiss to Amira's temple. "And she has your heart," he said. "Beautiful, full of light." For a long while, they sat together in silence, wrapped in warmth and love. The world outside forgotten, Grace stirred faintly, opening her eyes for the briefest moment, gazing up at them both before slipping back into sleep. And in that quiet moment, David understood something deeper than blood, deeper than appearance. Family was not just what the eye could see. It was love. It was sacrifice. It was the choice to hold on, even when fear tried to pull you away. And as the sun rose higher, painting the new day with promise, David held his family close, his heart at last at peace. Their story was just beginning, and would be written in love.